Hello and welcome to the first of the QT Access series with Nafel Testoni and Scott Stirrett for a timely and important conversation on Scott's recent book, The Uncertainty Advantage, Launching Your Career in an Era of Rapid Change. We're just starting off here. We will begin in just a moment. Up in the top left-hand corner, you will see a quiz that Scott has developed. This will take you to, once you fill it out, it will take you to tools and resources to better orient yourself in this session and afterwards. So you can take that now. QueerTech would like to continue opening this session by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of the land that we're on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. I, myself, Amos, am located in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the Red River Métis Nation. We're recognized as the custodians of these lands. Shoal Lake of Treaty 3 territory provides Winnipeg with its water. QueerTech is committed to Indigenous reconciliation and is in the process of constructing frameworks in order to adhere to action items outlined by the UNDRIP and the TRC calls to action. This is particularly relevant today, following the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. We acknowledge that we're just at the beginning of our journey and encourage all people of all backgrounds to educate themselves. First, on the crimes against humanity done by settlers to the Indigenous peoples of these lands across hundreds of years, and second, on how you can be involved in Indigenous reconciliation, given how you have ended up on these lands. There's further resources available here and on the QueerTech website. The QueerTech Code of Conduct, very simple. Be respectful, be kind, be present, lead with empathy. QueerTech is a harassment-free zone. You can learn more at our Code of Conduct online. We would like to shout out to RBC with a very big thank you for sponsoring not just this session, but the QT Access series as a whole. RBC has been a long time and huge supporter of QueerTech, enabling change with this program and with many programs. We'd also like to thank a variety of other corporate partners. With their help, we can continue to queer the tech ecosystem and provide necessary resources. You can check out the job board on the QueerTech's website that currently has over 5,000 available job postings. You can fill out your QT profile with your CV and continue your professional journey, however that looks. QueerTech. We're here to queer the tech ecosystem. QueerTech strives to queer the tech ecosystem by breaking down barriers, creating spaces, and connecting communities to support and empower 2S LGBTQI+ people to thrive. The QT Access program is one of these programs that centers on learning and career development. It supports queer professionals in skill development, expanding their networks, and finding a sense of belonging in the changing landscape that is both the world and the tech industry, all while building tools and confidence needed for finding their next opportunity. This is particularly essential at this time, in today's world, where both the tech industry and our lives are constantly changing, and the tools and skills we need can feel uncertain. But by drawing on resilience and practicing self-compassion, setbacks can become stepping stones instead of roadblocks. The old playbook of linear career paths no longer applies, a reality that both Nafel and Scott know well and can speak to. With that, I'm delighted to welcome Nafel, CEO and co-founder of QueerTech, and Scott, founder of VFC and author of The Uncertainty Advantage. I'll pass it over to you. Welcome to the stage.
This part always makes me laugh. Welcome everyone, and this is Naufal. I'm the CEO and co-founder at QueerTech. Super excited for my conversation today with our speaker and friend, Scott. Welcome to our webinar series for the QT Access audience. I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, before we dive in, we like our speakers to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit more about them. And we also want to know about the book. Why this book and why now?
So why now is because the world is more uncertain than ever. According to the World Uncertainty Index, the world today is around 4 times more uncertain than it was in early 2008. And when I do speaking sessions around the book, sometimes I'll open and I'll ask people to raise their hands if they feel the world is more uncertain today than it was 10 years ago. And pretty much every single person raises their hand. And so if you're feeling like the world is more uncertain, you're not wrong. It objectively is more uncertain. And that's driven by AI, political instability, climate change, increasing global interconnectedness. And this book is so relevant right now because in an age of uncertainty, your ability to thrive in ambiguous and uncertain environments is more important than ever. And in fact, I argue in my book that learning to embrace the uncertainty of the world is the most important thing that you can do in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott, for those who haven't read the book, walk us through, you start your career with Goldman Sachs in New York. So walk us a little bit through that career trajectory. So, and we'll come back and touch base on these in our interview.
After I graduated from Georgetown University, I got a full-time job at Goldman Sachs in New York, and I was working in New York City. I was 22. I was making a great income and working in this beautiful office tower. But I knew that it wasn't a right fit for me. I loved entrepreneurship. I love social impact. And I decided to quit my job at Goldman Sachs when I was 22 to move back to Canada to go launch Venture for Canada, which at that point was just an idea. There was no resources. And over the last 11 and a half years, Venture for Canada has gone from just like a little idea to an organization that's raised over $80 million of funding, helped over 10,000 people launch their careers. And my decision to leave Goldman Sachs to launch Venture for Canada is a great example of leaning into uncertainty and embracing it. And it was probably one of the riskiest things I've done in my life, but it was also the decision that I am the proudest of and that changed my life for the better in a really profound way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we dive into our questions today, I know we have a live surveys that we've shared with our audience. Scott, do you want to look at some of those scores and see what results we're getting out of the survey before we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing a few of them that are coming in, and I see one that is from chat@carosun.ca. There's a score of 28. Okay. There's another score that just came in from Jaron. That is a 30. There's another score of 28 from Almost. There's another one from, I'm just looking through them. I'm one of 33 with Corb Gens. Anyway, I won't read them all off, but what I'll share is what this quiz does is it gives you a score from 0 to 48 of how comfortable you are with uncertainty, with 0 being that you are not comfortable and 48 being that you are very comfortable. And at this point, I think I've almost 500 people have done this survey. So I have a lot of data. The average score is like around 31. And what I'd say why this survey is so important is because the first step of learning to embrace the uncertainty of the world is learning what is your current relationship with uncertainty, with the caveat being that our relationship with uncertainty is ever evolving, and that you can love uncertainty sometimes in a certain moment of the day or in a certain with a certain thing, but then there's other things that you hate uncertainty with. So with the score, your score changes by the minute. And also you can learn, most importantly, to develop a better relationship with uncertainty. Like the score does not define you. And the core message of Uncertainty Advantage is that anyone can learn to develop a better relationship with uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, uncertainty have always been there, right? Future is uncertain as we navigate career and life. But with all the recent events, it feels like that uncertainty have been compounded. The pandemic was one of the big accelerator for that, and then with everything that's going on. And so, you know, you in your book you describe embracing not knowing as a career strategy. And so, when was the first time you saw that not knowing was an advantage for you?
One of the main things that motivated me to write this book was in COVID, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And I had a really significant mental health challenge for around 6 months where I had a paralyzing fear of uncertainty. And it actually took me years to feel better. And I saw firsthand that when you try to control the uncertainty in the world, in my case, it was through compulsive behavior and through avoiding things that scared me, the more that uncertainty controlled me. And while a relatively small percentage of the population has OCD, I think many people often have a fear of uncertainty. It's in some ways baked into our DNA because when we were cave people, uncertainty often meant death. So what motivated me to write this book is that I experienced such significant challenges in terms of fear of uncertainty. And I wish a book like The Uncertainty Advantage existed in my 20s. So I had more of the tools, the tips, the habits on ultimately how to develop a better relationship with uncertainty, because uncertainty isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
We don't choose the era we live in, but we can choose to build up our uncertainty muscles.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you went from, you know, Goldman Sachs having a full-time job in New York City to founding Venture for Canada. There is nothing more uncertain than launching a new business and starting a new business. So, you know, you've started learning also navigating uncertainty as a founder. And so tell us a little bit more how that experience, I mean, you had to do fundraising, hiring, building trust with funders. And, you know, I find that very powerful, right? Like for someone who started also QueerTech, like what did that experience teach you about, you know, resilience in uncertainty and uncertain times?
The first couple of years of Venture for Canada were super tough. It felt like I was many times like Venture for Canada was going to go bankrupt and that we couldn't pay people. And I was really afraid of whether the organization was going to keep on continuing. And it was dealing with uncertainty every day. And to give up a really prestigious job to go do something that was so uncertain required a ton of risk-taking on my part. And what I learned from those first couple of years of Venture for Canada was one, that I had in that time developed some bad habits around coping with uncertainty. That's when I think some of my OCD tendencies started to get a lot like worse because I had a lot of stress going on. And I have compassion for myself that I lacked the tools on how to cope with it. And so that's one kind of reflection from that time is actually not to say, oh my God, I did such a good job, but to say there's a lot of things I would have done differently. And as I now deal with uncertainty in my life, I try to cope with it in a lot of different ways than actually how I dealt with it in that era. The second thing that I would say is that time in my life was really, it was anxiety inducing, but it was also so energizing. Now, Phil, you might relate to the early days of QueerTech, but when you're first starting something up, you have all these challenges, but you wake up and you get out of bed and you're so energized. Even right now, there's a lot of energizing things in my life. I woke up at like 4 a.m. today, just like not with an anxious energy, but like a passionate energy to get things done. And I think uncertainty for some can cause anxiety, but also it can cause excitement. And I'll end with the note on, there's a great book called The Upside of Stress. And sometimes we live in a society that stigmatizes stress and says, oh, get the stress out of your life. And the thing Kelly McGonigal makes the case in The Upside of Stress is that stress is integral to living a meaningful life. Because what stress means is that there is something in your life that you care about and that you feel is at stake. Yep. And if you don't care about anything, then you're not going to have any stress in your life. No. And so if you're going to live a meaningful life, if you're going to care, if you're going to feel, then you're going to have stress. And stress isn't always a bad thing. And I think that that's really important for any listener here to think about, because I think we live in a society that often stigmatizes stress. Certainly there's bad stress. Stress can become paralyzing, but stress can also be a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, think about moments that happen to me where stress is always when you have that little stress before doing something big. You've never done it. You're not sure about what the result's going to be. You always have that little pit in your stomach to do it. And then you kind of get over that. And, there's a moment where you need to take a moment from stressful situations and calm down and do it. And so, I'm excited kind of looking at we talk a lot about careers, right? Our QT access are young generation students, people transitioning into tech, a lot of early careers who are having a lot of hard time, entering the job market. And so, your wrote about launching a career today requires different tools than in the past. And so, from what I've seen, again at QueerTech and many queer folks are forced to invent their own playbook, right, as they get started with their career. So how does your framework help people who are already navigating systemic barriers to kind of overcome that uncertainty?
Yeah, it's a really important point to note, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, is if you're socioeconomically marginalized, the level of uncertainty that you have to cope with is often a lot higher than if you're not socioeconomically marginalized. So in many ways, I think the uncertainty advantage is most helpful for those who are the most marginalized in society. And if there's one thing I would, maybe two things I would emphasize. The first is just the importance of self-compassion, which is that in an uncertain world, there's a lot that can happen that hurts you in a negative way that you have no control over. And it's important to talk to yourself in a gentle way, to recognize shared humanity, to be mindful of how you're feeling. These are all the three elements of self-compassion as defined by Dr. Kristen Neff, in many ways the godmother of the self-compassion movement. So that's the first piece of advice I would have for you. The second is the importance of an entrepreneurial mindset. I think a lot of queer people, socioeconomically marginalized people, can't find their place in big institutions in the same way. And for me, even though I've had a lot of socioeconomic advantages, I think there's a degree to which I've gone towards entrepreneurship because I'm like, I'd rather make my own luck than have other people determine my fate. Yeah. And for me, that's been an important kind of mantra. I think for a lot of queer people and socioeconomically marginalized people, it can often make sense to say, hey, I'm going to go out on my own and be, master of my own house, then go work in a big institution that is maybe structurally not set up as much to accommodate me. So the advice I'd have on being entrepreneurial is identify and act upon opportunities. In terms of the identify part, read wide-ranging content, talk to people who have a wide range of views. And, I think it's not a coincidence that so many of the leading people in Silicon Valley are queer. You look at Sam Altman, you look at Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. It's because I think a lot of queer people will see the world in a different kind of way. And it's ultimately people who can think outside of the box that are often best positioned to thrive. And I think queer people, there's a degree of sort of entrepreneurial thinking that a lot of, I think, queer people have innate based on our lived experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of our QT Access participants are, kind of transitioning again between careers and industries. And so sometimes it feels like, I hear people saying oh, I have to start over again and trying to navigate, their career path. And so, based on the framework that we've discussed, what's, one of the uncertainty they can do tomorrow to kind of start building that muscle, right? You talk a lot about uncertainty is also about training your brain. So how, what are some of the things they can do to start building the uncertainty muscle?
If there's one piece of advice I'd have is build your risk-taking muscles, because what does an uncertain situation mean? An uncertain situation means that there's a degree of risk that is inherent, because it means you're making a decision with an uncertain outcome, and that is risk. Yeah. And if you're going to take advantage of all the opportunities that exist in the world, of which there are in many ways more opportunities emerging at a faster pace than ever before. because of the rapidly changing nature of things.
Yeah.
So people need to constantly think around developing their risk-taking muscles. Yeah. And it's important to acknowledge different socioeconomic realities. It's way easier to take risks if you have a social safety net and you have socioeconomic advantages. Yeah. But regardless of where your starting point is, everyone can increase their risk-taking muscles. And that's a core message of the book. And how do you do that is you think like right now, what is one risk that you can take in your life to push yourself out of your comfort zone? That could be as little as like speaking up in a meeting. Yeah. I've done sessions on the book, and some people, I've asked this question interactively, people, and sometimes they'll say it's smiling to a stranger. Like risks can be very tiny, but if you think every day of just little things that push yourself out of your comfort zone, you build that risk-taking muscle over time. And I'll share, you mean the point of vulnerability is like when I was suffering the challenges with OCD, it was hard for me to even meet people in person. Like I really had a lot of social anxiety. I remember having like a panic attack in my house from seeing people, and it was really hard. How did I get over that? It was like every day pushing myself to socialize. And now in many ways, I enjoy spending time with people more than before the pandemic. But it's that steady little push. And it's amazing through incremental pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you can rehabituate your brain to like risk in a way that could be unimaginable today.
Yeah. And you know, I love the story because stories are powerful. And so for you, can you tell us what was that step you took? So like, you know, you're at home, I mean, panic attack, you can't meet up people. And then you make that decision. Was it going to an event? Was it meeting one person? Like, what was that first step that kind of helps you build that tolerance?
The first was having a degree of like self-compassion for myself. We had a bunch of people over, and it was the first time we'd done that. And yeah, I just like, I really was like, I can't handle this. And then I went into our basement and my body was just shaking and I had a blanket. And I remember just having a self-compassion, like this is a really tough like moment. And what I ended up doing is in OCD therapy, sometimes it's acknowledging the worst can happen. And I kept on having, oh my God, am I never going to be able to do this ever again? And I would, and I said, yeah, okay. I'm going to have panic attack every time that I see someone for the rest of my life or in a social setting, but I'm going to keep on going to those social settings, even if that's going to happen. And yeah, that involves going to work lunches. And in many ways, what I started doing was inviting more people over to our house for dinner than before the pandemic. And now I feel like I have a broader social network because of it. So if I was going to nutshell, what I did, Nafal, is kind of lean in and I said, I'm going to, and before the pandemic, I would feel weird about sometimes inviting people over and think, oh, maybe they're going to reject my request. And then I was just like, you know, screw it. I'm just going to, you know, invite people over like every weekend. Yeah. And that really habituated me to enjoy socializing in a way that even before COVID, I struggled with. I mean, I still can sometimes have, like, I'm not cured of social anxiety. I still have it come back at different moments. And I think that's important to note, but I feel much more comfortable in my skin socially than I did pre-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I hear your story and there is so many QTs I talk to who are sometimes introverted, sometimes don't have, you know, that bandwidth. And like, so for example, we talk a lot about, you know, one way to lead to jobs is building your professional network. And in order to build a professional network, you need to go to certain events and put yourself out there and meet people. And that idea is terrifying to a lot of people who, you know, especially when you're a student or your early career, you don't know how to navigate that. And so, you know, that's one of the things. Take a first step. I tell them, come to a QueerTech event. Tell us as an organizers, we can help you introduce, and we can help you take that first step. So you could, you know, all it takes is meeting that one person at an event and you come back and now you might know two. And that's how you build, you know, that muscle also in that capacity. In your book, you talk about, you know, you balance optimism with realism. And so do you think young professionals today actually have more opportunities or just more risks that's dressed up in opportunities?
I think both. I think there's like in Canada, like a lot of challenges young people face that didn't exist in the past. For instance, like housing, just the inaffordability of it is like a huge challenge that the 40 years ago people didn't have to deal with. There are also more, I think, business opportunities. Like it is easier to launch a tech company today than at any point. I think entrepreneurship is more accessible today than ever before. Yeah. And I do believe there are more opportunities. Like there are roadblocks. It's to say both are true. In some ways, there are both more roadblocks and more opportunities at the same time. And I think the key, one of the most important things of figuring out how to develop a better relationship with uncertainty is actually just viewing that uncertainty as a good thing. Like it becomes self-determining. If you view uncertainty as negative, then it's probably going to be negative. Yeah. If you view uncertainty as positive, and then hence you think of the opportunities in uncertainty, you're way more likely to thrive in an uncertain era.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, we talk about a lot of entrepreneurship, and we tell people sometimes a lot of people are trying to find a job. It's really hard. They're submitting resumes, they're not hearing back. And it's like, some of them are saying, well, maybe I'm going to start my own company and I'm going to do this. And it seems even more uncertain than just sending your resumes and hoping for an interview. But that could be a path where you get control of your life, right? And have that opportunity to do something even bigger.
And I think in our current world, and this is going to become even more common, is that you're going to have fewer and fewer people employed in 9-to-5 jobs. You're going to have a much higher percentage of people be freelancers, be self-employed. The fastest growing segment of entrepreneurship in North America are not people who run businesses that have a bunch of employees. It's freelancers. The growth in the freelance economy is massive. I mean, you look at China, there were 200 million people who are freelancers in China. 200 million. That's the size of the entire American workforce.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to become more the place in North America. Now, there are challenges, which I acknowledge in the book, of gig work and freelance work, and in terms of the precarity. But there are also so many entrepreneurial kind of advantages of freedom. And I think, to my earlier point, you don't choose the area you live in. I think we're going in that direction of increased self-employment. And the more you build up your entrepreneurial muscle, the more you're going to thrive, because the era of like the 9-to-5 job and working for the government for 35 years, I think is going to become less and less common. And even look in the US today, like all the 750,000 government employees furloughed, like even government type jobs are not as stable as people once thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, entrepreneurship is such a great skills to have. Even working within companies, being an entrepreneur and knowing how to navigate organizations and structures come in really handy. One of the things when I think a lot about uncertainty, and probably some of our viewers are thinking about, is like, it can also be exhausting, right? Like there is just so much. Sometimes you wake up and you're positive and you're like, I can do it. And sometimes it's just with everything going on and more problem, it's harder. And so what do you recommend, how do you keep that flexibility and also avoid burning out because of all this uncertainty?
There's only so much uncertainty that we can all take in our lives. And I think one of the things, when you have too much uncertainty in your life, things begin to like snap, no matter how strong your uncertainty muscles are. And a lot of the people I find who are the best at navigating uncertainty are people who have like a really strong foundations of stability in their life. So that can be like a spouse or routines or savings. Like there's a lot of things that can create like stability. But essentially, if everything is uncertain all at once, like I'll share, it's that if you're going through a divorce and you have professional uncertainty and your like mother is ill, okay, then that's when I feel like even resilient people can start to get into these challenges, because they have a lot of uncertainty muscles, but there's only so much that people can take. Even you look at someone like Elon Musk, who obviously very successful, but it's like, even like him, you can see where it's like, he pushes his uncertainty to the extreme that it like causes him to like crack in different kinds of ways. I think if you're trying to develop a better relationship with uncertainty, think about what are the pillars of stability that you can foster in your life so that you can, for the things that where you want to embrace uncertainty, you can really do that. And I think a lot of that, the time, those elements of stability are relationships, their habits, they're financial.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing you mentioned in the book that drew my attention is talking about curiosity. And I feel like sometimes turning also, uncertainty is about doing things you don't know what the outcome is. But I think this is where also curiosity is very important, because you can, even if an outcome is negative, you're curious enough, you can learn from that outcome, right? And you can iterate on that outcome. So, talk to us a little bit, why is that important, and how do people can demonstrate that through when they're navigating uncertainty?
I mean, I think that people can demonstrate their uncertainty kind of capabilities in a couple of different ways. I think one is through like the lived experiences that they've had, and that they can kind of like point to of like, hey, I had this really tricky situation. I was literally talking to someone earlier today, and they were like, they were asking me about like challenging situations that I dealt with in life. And I shared an example where Venture for Canada grew from like 2 employees to like 15 employees. And in the span of like 2 months, or not 2 months, but it was like around 3 months. And I think you can sort of demonstrate your comfort of uncertainty of when you've gone through tough times and you said, hey, I went through this and I got through it. And so much of your ability, I think developing a better relationship with uncertainty is through practice. And the way you develop your uncertainty self-efficacy, your confidence in your ability to navigate uncertainty, is just navigating with uncertain situations. So one of the things I recommend people do is like write down your wins. Like if you're maybe feeling you're not good at uncertainty today, like think about what are really uncertain moments in your life, write them down on a piece of paper, and tell yourself like, hey, there are moments in my life where I have done an amazing job of navigating really uncertain situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, when we think about uncertainty, especially in today's job market, a lot of young people are facing constant rejection, from job applications, interviews, or entrepreneurs getting no for their fundings as they try to raise money. And so that kind of rejection also hit like the self-esteem, right? And so how can they reframe that rejection so it becomes a fuel for growth and not feels like a personal defeat?
There's an amazing book called The Upside of Wrong by Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson. And in it, she talks about the importance of intelligent failures, which are essentially failures that you learn something, that don't wipe you out, and that also were not easily avoidable. And when I look at really successful entrepreneurial people, there are people who have tons of intelligent failures. Most people who are really successful fail way more than they succeed. And I think when you have a setback, it's important to ask yourself, like, what did I learn from this experience? And how did this set me up for something else in the future? And for myself, like, I feel like in my life, like I can say, oh, I've done all these things, but I have failed at way more things than I have succeeded at in my life. Probably like I failed at like 5 or 6 times the number of things that I've succeeded at. And I feel like every week I fail at a bunch of things. And what's important to note is that, like, if you're not failing, you're not learning, and you're not pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So I think failure is an incredibly important part of navigating uncertainty and ultimately of just personal development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really great advice, because I see a lot of young people, and I think everyone, right? Like, you fail and you feel defeated by the failure. And I think it's very important to use that also to fuel your energy and that learning. And so that's really important. You share your own routine for resilience, right? And kind of like talking through the book again. And so I'm curious, can you walk us through one or a couple habits that you do when you feel mostly unstable or uncertain? You talked about practice some self compassion, but what are some of the things also or habits that you've instituted in your daily life?
One habit that I think is really helpful is defining your personal values and your mission statement. Because in a world that is very topsy-turvy, you're going to face ethical dilemmas. And the world is a messy place. Mm-hmm. The more responsibility you have, the more you realize that there are often very rarely very clear-cut situations. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you define your life mission, which is, for me, to help others achieve their full potential, and if you define your life values, which are, for me, integrity, ambition, curiosity, and inclusiveness, mm-hmm. then when you have challenging moments that are really uncertain, you reflect back on those values, you reflect on your life mission, and you use that as the prism on how to make really important decisions. And that's one thing that I think is a really helpful tool that helps me navigate uncertain times. A second thing that helps me navigate uncertainty is a mindset from this book called Choose Possibility by Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, who's an amazing Canadian entrepreneur, the CEO of Xero, which is a company around $20 billion market cap. And Sukhinder talks about how in life, a lot of times people think one decision determines their life. And sometimes there are certain decisions that can have a big impact. But the more that you realize that your life is actually shaped by the 10,000 little decisions that you make, you become more comfortable at risk-taking because you recognize that it's not all about that one decision. Life is a series of bets. If that decision doesn't work, then you know what? There's another 8,000 decisions after that. Yeah. And the more you realize that life is a series of bets and that your life isn't defined by one big risk, I think the more that you become comfortable making bets in life. And even me leaving Goldman Sachs to go create Venture for Canada. Who knows? Maybe what if Venture for Canada failed after year one? Okay, then I go get a job. And even the worst case scenario is often not necessarily that apocalyptic. There is always another bet that you can make later on in life.
Yeah, I read that book and I love that. It makes me a lot of think about all the little decisions. And, again, example I give everyone, you're like, oh, I want to go to this event to network and stuff. And then you go and you might meet your future employer or an opportunity there. And sometimes you might miss out and not even know, just by saying, oh, well, I'm not going to go today, And so just making small decisions that you might think don't matter even can have that impact. So, so thinking through those little decisions is also really important. I see some questions coming up from our audience here. So I would like us to move into some Q&A. Amos, what do we have in the Q&A section?
So in the chats that are coming in, some people are repeating some of the ideas that are coming up. Out of the box advantage, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. Someone asked a question earlier on, which Scott, you addressed a little bit, but how do you get comfortable with the uncertain? And yeah, I think you touched upon that a little bit. I have some questions that I would love to bring forward into this conversation, and people in the chat can continue sending them in. Really thinking about the beginning stages of someone's journey. And so, Scott, you've spoken about how you've taken certain things that can feel really disempowering, whether that be feeling out of control or debilitated with OCD, and turning that into a real source of strength. One of the outcomes being this book. What advice would you give for reframing these personal challenges, whether they be around uncertainty, OCD, queerness, the Lojo world, into superpowers for our professional journeys?
Yeah, for me, getting diagnosed with OCD was really empowering because it helped me gain more awareness of patterns of behavior that I had. And we all have different tendencies. And frankly, we can all be self-destructive in different kinds of ways. And getting diagnosed with OCD made me realize, okay, these are my self-destructive tendencies. And I need to keep an eye on them and going through exposure ritual prevention therapy and working with a licensed clinician helped give me the tools to better navigate and deal with some of the OCD tendencies that I have. And for me, it was really empowering. And I think a lot of people that can get diagnosed with OCD or ADHD, and it becomes this limiting thing where they're like, okay, I can't achieve what I thought I could. And initially I was kind of like that. Like I was like, oh my God, my life has changed forever. And then I was like, actually, no, this is just a self-awareness tool. OCD is not necessarily easy, and there are really challenging moments. But I continue to live a life that I am super happy, in some ways happier than I have been in a long time. And getting diagnosed with OCD was one of the most empowering things that I had in my life. And I would say, to also answer your question almost, is in terms of like my queer identity, I think coming out of the closet and being like my authentic self was one of the most empowering things I did in my life. One of the things I talk about in the Uncertainty Advantage is that I founded Venture for Canada around a year after I came out of the closet. And I don't think that I would have ever founded Venture for Canada if I hadn't have gone out of my comfort zone and come out of the closet. And it was in these moments of like where you embrace your authenticity, where you go out of your comfort zone, that again, going back to what we talked about earlier, you become more comfortable taking risks. So whether it's embracing queerness or it is embracing OCD, or at least not stigmatizing myself for having a mental illness, that I found some of my greatest moments of strength.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Awesome.
We don't have any more questions in the chat. Are there any? Well, I have one more question I can share, but then if I can also pass it back to you.
Let's go one more question, and then we'll wrap up because we're coming to time very soon.
Beautiful. So, Scott, you've been talking about really feeling the empowerment of coming to terms with yourself, of claiming authenticity, of being in your power. I'm really curious. There's some systemic barriers that we are seeing on a large scale right now, especially for young queer professionals. Those folks who are navigating bias or exclusion in tech, what are some practical ways to help continue fostering that curiosity and that explorativeness that you've been speaking to, that can help turn these difficulties that they're experiencing into the mindset where they can see the opportunity?
I think the first point is to acknowledge like the systemic challenges are tough, and to have that self-compassion for yourself of like, this is a difficult thing to be dealing with, and it's not my fault. And self-compassion, I think, is key. It's not blaming yourself for the systemic challenges. And then I think the second thing is to say, you don't control the systemic challenges that exist in the world, but you can control your actions. And ultimately, one of the things I think that's really important is to like, when you claim your power, right? Like when you say, I'm going to control what I can control, I think that when you lean into your agency, even in the face of systemic challenges, you can think of creative, solutions. And I think as we talked about earlier, for queer people, leaning into that entrepreneurial action of thinking, hey, I'm going to think out of the box. I'm going to build my own system. I'm going to build my own company. That's often the unfortunate reality of, I think, what a lot of queer people have to be entrepreneurial out of necessity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Amos, for the questions. Scott, I see one more question that came through the chat that says, how much of safety net would one need to try entrepreneurship?
I think it depends on every single person. Sorry, so another thing there. But I think it's to say, like, if you have kids, if you're caregiving responsibilities for parents or loved ones, then we all have different socioeconomic realities. So I think it's just reflecting for your own self of like, what is the kind of income that you need? And, I'd say if you have like liquid cash flow investments where you don't need to work for like, 2 to 4 years, then I think that to me would be like a really strong safety net in terms of your ability to take risk. I'm happy to respond to the other comment too. I saw from Hank Park.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I appreciate you sharing, Hank. And yeah, I mean, I think it's an important note. It's something that I wish when I was diagnosed with OCD in early 2021, I wish someone said to me. It took a while for me to kind of come to terms and view getting diagnosed with OCD in an empowering way. But it has become empowering. But if you're in a situation, maybe you've recently been diagnosed, or it's harder to see that, I have a lot of empathy. It wasn't immediately that I felt that way. It took me some time for OCD, that diagnosis, to feel truly empowering. And the final thing I'd say is a lot of me writing this book and talking about OCD in a candid way is also about like leaning in and finding my power. And I think for me, if I hid OCD from people and I said, oh, I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm not going to acknowledge that I had these really challenging moments, then it's like, it's me trying to like box that. Really, it was a traumatic experience in my life, box it away.
Yeah.
And my understanding in my own life is it's not about like ignoring the trauma that I've experienced, but it's about moving forward with it, because that traumatic experience happened to me. And I think ultimately it's about how can I, move forward with that experience. And part of that is not being afraid to talk about it and to be open about it. And I feel that the more that I'm open about OCD, the more that I talk about it publicly, and even in writing a whole book about this, we are creatures, humans are meaning makers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And one of the main reasons I wrote The Uncertainty Advantage was to find meaning from the challenges that I experienced with uncertainty, and ultimately provide a tool to help others better navigate uncertainty in their lives and careers. So Hank, I wish you the best with ADHD and anxiety. And I know the year after diagnosis isn't always easier, but I hope that I wish you the best as you continue in your journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Something quickly, we talked about the entrepreneurship earlier, the person that talked about safety net. And sometimes, entrepreneurship also is not like a zero-sum game. It's not like you're an entrepreneur or you're not. I think there is a lot of time. And I even think about my journey with QueerTech. It was like, we started it with steps, right? And so people can still have a full-time job. You can do that and then, reserve sometimes either your evening or your weekend that you work on your project and you move it forward. And what I find is really good is to give yourself some goals, right? And say, once I solidify my idea and it turns into a project, maybe there's funding opportunities I need to incorporate. And so these are some milestones that can help the person see how is that idea going and what's the traction in the market and what's the interest before you kind of make that transition. So just something to think about. And there are a lot of resources in our ecosystem that help people kind of navigate that very early stage of entrepreneurship. I see we're coming out of time. Scott, what is some final thoughts or advice you have for our listeners as they think about navigating this uncertain time? Something that we haven't maybe talked about before we wrap up.
Your ability to handle not knowing is increasingly more important than what you know in your life and career. And if there was one thing I would emphasize to you is lean into the uncertainty. There is no way out but through. And the more that you learn to love uncertainty and actually to choose uncertainty, the more that you're going to thrive in our world. The more that you hide from uncertainty or you try to control the unknown, the more that the unknown is going to wreak havoc in your life. And we live in both anxiety-inducing but exciting times. And I wish you all the best as you go on your journey of turning uncertainty into an advantage in your life and career. Thanks.
Scott, thank you again for joining us, sharing your experience and talking about the book. For those who are interested, the book is available. You can buy in different places, and we'll share some of these links with you so you can check it out. I read it and I really loved the style and the storytelling part of it. It was really great to kind of learn through a lot of things through the story. So thank you again for joining us and sharing the story. For those who are online, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned for another couple of minutes. Amos have a few things to share with you. We have some upcoming events and webinars and events that we're doing for you. So stay tuned. And thank you again, Scott.
My pleasure.
Back to you, Amos.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nafel. Thank you, Scott. That was so insightful and inspiring and really grounding. So I'm excited to come away from this conversation continuing to munch on some things, and Scott, to pick up your book again. Some of the resources that Nafel alluded to are with the Google certifications on Coursera. And so some of these look at cybersecurity, project management, data and analytics. If you scan that QR code, you can sign up to get access to these resources. There's over 300 different certifications that are available through this. This is another stream of QT access alongside the synchronous sessions that we have here. Some other QueerTech opportunities upcoming are these virtual events as well as in person. So next week we have a conversation with Bell, landing your internship or co-op, position yourself for what comes next. And then we also that same day have a QTC, QT Connect meetup in Vancouver, which is in person. The week after that, we have another community session, Navigating Crisis, Finding Clarity and Resilience, with an event each week thereafter. On November 5th as well, we have a meetup in Toronto. So if you're in Vancouver or Toronto, check those out. We have the QTQ, the QT conference, coming up November 19th to 20th. You can scan that QR code to sign up now, and come join us for 2 days of exciting talks, conversations, meetups with recruiters, and finding your next opportunity, whether that be in collaboration with a company or community members, or bringing gifts to the community. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next events. And until then, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week. Goodbye.